He bled red, white, and blue, but they only saw black. Chapter 1. The Call of Duty, Sergeant James Jimmy Evans had always dreamed of serving his country. Born in a small southern town during the 1940s, he was raised with a deep sense of patriotism instilled by his family. His father, a former soldier in World War I, had told him stories of the sacrifices made by those who fought for the freedom that America represented. It was a land of opportunities, a country that he believed in, even as a black man growing up in an era defined by segregation and systemic racism. When World War II broke out, Jimmy, like so many others, saw it as his chance to serve the greater good, to fight for a cause that transcended race, a fight for democracy and freedom. At the age of 18, he enlisted in the Army, excited to follow in the footsteps of those who came before him. He didn't want to just serve, he wanted to make a difference. He wanted to fight for the red, white, and blue that he was taught represented liberty and justice for all. But from the moment Jimmy stepped onto the base, he realized that the military wasn't as idealistic as he had imagined. The armed forces were as segregated as the society he had left behind. Black soldiers like Jimmy were assigned to their own units, were treated as second-class citizens, and were often given the most dangerous and degrading tasks. Despite the blatant discrimination, Jimmy pushed forward. He trained hard, showing determination and grit that earned the respect of his fellow black soldiers, if not the white officers who looked down on them. His loyalty to the country he served was unwavering, even though the country did not return that loyalty to him. Chapter 2. The Battle Overseas. Jimmy was sent to the European theater of the war, where he was placed in a segregated unit and given menial tasks. While white soldiers were placed in combat positions, Jimmy's unit was often relegated to behind-the-scenes jobs, loading trucks, building supply lines, and doing manual labor. It was hard for him not to feel the sting of injustice as he watched his fellow white soldiers march proudly into battle, while he and his brothers in arms were left to toil in the background, far from the glory of combat. Despite this, Jimmy remained focused on his duty. He was sent to the front lines in France, where he found himself in the thick of the war, fighting bravely against Nazi forces. Even though his role wasn't as glamorous as that of his white counterparts, he performed his job with excellence. He saved lives, protected his comrades, and showed remarkable courage under fire. When the Allies liberated France, Jimmy was proud of the part he played, even though it was hard to ignore the subtle but sharp recognition that came with his race. In a small village in France, Jimmy and his unit were tasked with clearing out German forces from a fortified position. As they approached the village, the chaos of war surrounded them. The sound of gunfire, the explosions of grenades, and the cries of soldiers in battle. But in the midst of it all, Jimmy's focus was unshakable. He fought like a man who knew that his service meant more than just winning a war. It was about proving that black men could fight just as valiantly as their white counterparts, even when society refused to see them as equals. When the Germans were defeated and the village was liberated, the villagers lined the streets to thank the soldiers. They cheered and waved the American flag. But when they looked at Jimmy and the other black soldiers, their cheers faltered. They turned their eyes away, offering their gratitude only to the white soldiers. Jimmy felt the sting of their disregard. He had bled for these people, but to them, he was still just black. Chapter 3. A Hero's Return. After the war, Jimmy returned home to a hero's welcome from his community. His family was proud of him, and his friends and neighbors celebrated his bravery. But outside his tight-knit community, the country he had fought for continued to reject him. The America that he had bled for was still steeped in segregation and inequality. While white soldiers returned to a society that afforded them the benefits of their service, GI Bill loans, access to education, and better job opportunities, black soldiers like Jimmy were denied these same opportunities. The systemic racism that he had faced in the military followed him home. His military service should have been his ticket to a better life, but the country that he had fought for treated him no differently than it had before the war. He walked down the streets of his hometown in his military uniform, only to be met with looks of disdain. At a local diner, a white man spat on the ground as Jimmy passed by. "What's a Negro doing wearing a uniform?" the man sneered. Jimmy's heart sank. He had fought for this country. He had risked his life to ensure that others could enjoy the freedoms they often took for granted. And yet, to the very people he had fought for, he was still just another black man. Chapter 4. The Cost of Sacrifice. As the years went by, Jimmy's frustration with the nation he had served grew. He found work, but it was always the same: manual labor, subpar wages, and the constant reminder that his race dictated the opportunities he would ever have. He looked at his fellow black veterans, all of whom had sacrificed so much, and saw that they too were living lives marked by inequality. He had bled for his country, but his country had not bled for him. The promise of freedom and equality that he had fought for was a distant dream, a dream that seemed more and more impossible to achieve. But despite the daily indignities, Jimmy never stopped fighting. The pain of being invisible in a country that he had given so much for was real, but it didn't break him. He turned his frustration into action. As the civil rights movement gained momentum in the 1960s, Jimmy joined protests and demonstrations, marching for the rights that he had been denied. He fought for equality, not just for himself, but for every black man and woman who had been overlooked, disrespected, and oppressed. One evening, during a protest in his hometown, Jimmy stood at the front, holding a sign that read, "Equal rights for all Americans, no matter the color." As he looked out at the sea of faces, both black and white, he saw hope. His fight for equality had shifted from the battlefield of World War II to the streets of America, but it was no less important. He knew that he could not change the past, but he could fight for a future where the blood he had bled, the red, white, and blue, would finally represent him, not just as a soldier, but as a full, equal citizen. Chapter 5. The Reckoning. As the civil rights movement gained momentum, Jimmy found himself in the heart of a new fight, one that took place not on foreign soil, but in the streets of his own country. The protests, the marches, and the calls for justice were all familiar to him. He had fought for freedom in World War II, but the real battle had always been here at home. On a warm summer day in 1965, Jimmy sat with his fellow black veterans at a civil rights meeting in Washington, D.C. They had come together to talk about the long road ahead and to plan for the future. They had fought in the war together, and now they were fighting for a new kind of freedom, a freedom that extended to every black man, woman, and child in America. "We've bled together, brothers," Jimmy said, his voice strong despite the weight of his words. "We fought together, side by side on foreign soil, but now we need to fight for our own soil. We need to show this country that we are not just soldiers, we are Americans, and we demand the rights and the respect that we deserve." As the room filled with nods and murmurs of agreement, Jimmy knew that this was a fight that couldn't be won in one battle, nor in one generation. But he also knew that it was a fight worth having, and he would not back down. Sergeant James Evans passed away in 1980, but his legacy lived on. He had fought for freedom, equality, and justice, not just in the battlefield of World War II, but in the streets of America. He had bled for a country that had not fought for him, but in the end, his struggle had helped pave the way for the civil rights victories that followed. His story was not just one of a soldier, but of a man who refused to be invisible, who refused to be ignored, who demanded the right to live freely and equally in the country he had fought for. He bled red, white, and blue, but the country that bore those colors was forever changed by the sacrifices of men like him. Men who fought not just for their country's freedom, but for their own. And in the end, they would be seen for what they truly were: heroes. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you won't miss any exciting content. See you in the next video.